This is the Post Shift Podcast, a raw look at the hospitality industry. What has happened to Post Shifters, and welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. I want to say thank you very much, and I'm completely utterly grateful for all the support I've been getting for the Post Shift Podcast since the pandemic sort of hit and the lockdowns happened. I've been trying my very best to do a podcast every single day, Monday to Friday. The weekends, I try and keep up with all the other work I've got on, but I really appreciate everybody's support and listening in. The feedback I've been getting on social media has been great. I hope you've been enjoying it. I hope it's been bringing you some value, because it's difficult right now with so much social media out there to get really down to the nitty-gritty. And today is one of those very special episodes where I sit down with Michael Smith from SaveSmallBusiness.ca, and we really go outside the scope of hospitality and look at all small business across the board in Canada, because we do get into our little hospitality bubbles of social media, but he really tackles what's going on in the country and what they're expecting from the government in the next month or so. Really great talk. The guy really knuckled down on exactly what small business is about in Canada and what we need to do for this to actually work and happen and survive all this. So I hope you enjoy this episode, guys, and hope you're enjoying your week. Thanks again for your support. I'll chat to you soon. Bye.
So fantastic. It's really, thank you very much for your time. I know that with everything that's going on right now, you guys have been pretty aggressive in being very vocal on exactly what you need from the government for small businesses. So I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day for me.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, the reality is today in particular is fucking nuts.
You can swear on my podcast too. That's fine.
Yeah, just calling as I'm seeing it, and I'll share some of the behind the scenes on what's nuts. And just to confirm, you are recording now?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I usually just roll into it. So my podcast has been going for about a year and a half. It's very hospitality centric. I usually just do 2 episodes a week. But with everything that's been happening, I've been actually doing an episode a week. And that includes like recordings like this, live streams that I turn into podcasts, the whole shebang. A lot with people who are in the industry, with associations and lobbyist groups, and talking to chefs about mental health chef owners during all this. But I signed up for the newsletter and started really following the Save Small Business. And sometimes you can get caught in your little hospitality bubble. And so really I wanted to break that out in a big way to the macro and really start talking about all business, because I think there's something to be said for everything you're doing for the hospitality industry, but it is for everybody else as well.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of crossover, and if we think about hospitality having, to a large extent, perishable goods, whether that's restaurants, bars, coffee shops, other cafes, etc., anywhere where there's potentially food or beverage, or potentially also extending that into health and wellness space where there is certainly an increasing crossover. All of those are areas which we're very empathetic to, in part because we've seen the now over 36,000 small businesses across Canada that have shared their stories with us and helped us understand what does the reality look like on their main streets, wherever that is in Canadian communities.
So to give some context to the listeners that are tuning in, what do you do, and give a little bit of backstory to what exactly you do as a professional outside the Save Small Business?
Yeah, so as Chief Impact Officer of Impact Bridge, my work is, for many years, been acting as a strategic advisor to business leaders, and that includes both executives, board of directors, as well as investors. And for me, the majority of the folks that I'm working with would find themselves in the realm of agri-food and hospitality. There's various consumer packaged goods brands, certainly various organic, natural, plant-based food products, and increasingly as well tech companies. But in that realm, it's the majority are small and medium-sized enterprises based in Canada and across North America and some global brands. So really, as my work serving individual companies and working collaboratively to grow what I consider to be that ecosystem of organizations and companies that are trying to make the world better, improving the health of people and planet in some way, shape, or form. You know, as the COVID-19 crisis hit, particularly on the health side, I was really trying to determine where and how could I pitch in on the front lines. And for me, that was more on the recognition of the economic crisis, and the front lines being many of the small and local businesses in Toronto where I live and across the country that I've been fortunate to visit. Been fortunate to live in Vancouver and travel across Canada over the years for my work, and really love what the heart and soul of Main Streets in all communities looks like, with good coffee shops, restaurants, bars, breweries, wineries, distilleries, and others that would, you know, fall under the hospitality banner that have been so welcoming for me. So really what we created with SaveSmallBusiness.ca was a website, and launched it on March 22nd with a few good folks joining me as co-founders to ultimately call on the federal government to step up and address the unique needs of small Canadian businesses that, from the initial package that was announced by the federal government, were really at risk of not receiving any support that would really help them through this very challenging time.
With that initial package that was first announced, has it sort of evolved and changed and sort of started leaning into the end goal of what you're sort of lobbying for? Or is it still the same?
So if we look at the way that the federal government responded, there was a sort of initial decision made to provide broad supports that would help many Canadians, and some of those which would apply to business would include the wage subsidy, as well as the CERB benefit that would help some that had lost work or that were needing to work from home or care for family. So those initial programs that were announced in late March, they would help many Canadians, including those that had been laid off or been unable to work. But there was really a gap because the follow-on programming that was announced by the federal government, which was the Canadian Emergency Benefit Account, which was this sort of low-interest loan up to $40,000 for small businesses, that program was announced, and that was heralded by everyone from the Prime Minister to the Finance Minister Morneau as, really what would help local coffee shops and restaurants and hairdressers and others. And the reality was that many of the small businesses already had significant debt, and being asked to take on more debt was going to be very, very challenging, as well as the eligibility criteria was quite restrictive. So actually those businesses that were heralded as the sort of core people to be a part of the CEBA loan were actually not eligible, and many still to date do not qualify. So that was one major issue. And then the other was really, if we look at what's finally rolled out more than a month later, and many are calling it too little too late, is the CERCA program, which is the emergency program focused on commercial rent assistance. Mm-hmm. And so that's the program that was first indicated as coming last over a week ago by the Prime Minister, and then on last Friday, we had Trudeau share the further details of the confirmation that agreement between the federal government and all provinces had been reached on the rent relief deal. So that's taken a long time. That's something that we were first bringing to the federal government's attention back in late March, and it really took a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of education to share that, ultimately many other countries in Europe, Australia, with a similar jurisdictional issue between a federal government and provinces or states, all these other parts of the world had provided way more support to small business way faster. And we were, really leaving most of our small local businesses on main streets across Canada, really kind of wondering whether they would even survive through till May 1, which obviously was the second month that rent's due. So that's the situation we find ourselves as we're a few days in advance of May 1 and rent is due, and there's an agreement on the table, but it's one where landlords still hold the upper hand, and there's not a moratorium on evictions, which really would mean that more landlords and tenants are coming to the table with a real commitment to figure this out together and share the burden and work to ultimately have those businesses get through this. And many small landlords, exist as well as some larger ones, but in this situation, it's really those small business tenants that need greater support, and some have already closed and some are still on the brink. So that's what we're still really fighting for today.
Do you, from all the people that you've talked to, you said, how many people have you talked to? Like 36,000 businesses across the country. How has the landlord relationship been? Because I've heard a lot, especially in that April 1st, because it was 2 weeks after lockdown, that April 1st one came a lot quicker for a lot of people than they thought it would. And even trying to get a hold of your landlord in that 2 weeks and trying to open up a line of dialogue was extremely difficult for a lot of people. And some landlords were just like, they just pushed back on like, nope, you pay your rent, that's it. Have you sort of seen a change in landlord relations, or has it sort of just stayed the same still?
Well, I think there's been an evolution to this for everyone, all Canadians, including landlords and their small business tenants. So, certainly there was a lot of concerns from many, and those that were proactive did, in advance of April 1st, have conversations, some just verbal, some verbal and in writing. And there were some landlords that were doing what they could to help their tenants. I know of many landlords that offered a deferral agreement, which, deferrals would mean that, tenants would, in the following months or over a certain period of time, there would be a making up of the rent that was unable to be paid, say in the month of April or May. But I think as things evolved, really, April was the first full month where businesses, many were closed, certainly many businesses that were not on the essential services list across the country. So really the biggest challenge that most small business tenants face is they generally don't have much cash on hand. So, that can be 2 to 4 weeks. So some were able to pay rent in full April 1st, but as we look at May 1st, a few days away, the situation is significantly different, because there really is, for up to 70%, as we surveyed, of small business tenants, really not enough money to pay rent. And so some landlords had offered deferrals or had potentially offered other discounts, offered other agreements. But really now we find ourselves in a situation where there is a good deal that the federal government put forward, and that sort of CERCA program is intended to help landlords and tenants access relief for those businesses that have over 70% to 100% drop in sales. But what we've surveyed in the last 24 hours and found is that only 1 in 5 of the small businesses that would qualify for CERCA actually expect their landlord to sign on to the rent relief deal. So really that idea that, the program CERCA, as it's been announced, would help a vast majority of businesses that have had 70, 80, 90, or 100% drop in sales and have no cash to pay rent for May 1. But the reality is that there's a real concern that landlords are not going to come to the table. They're not going to take this deal because for some, they may have a desire to push their tenant out, or they may feel that, the longer they go with this, the more they might potentially be able to get more or renegotiate further with greater power. And in the case of some folks, for example, in Nova Scotia that have had a small program in place from the Nova Scotia provincial government, it also has to do with there might have been previous agreements in place. In the case of Nova Scotia, it was a rent deferral program, which, now that the federal and provincial program has been announced, that would be a much better deal. That would mean tenants would have relief. So we're dealing with a really messy reality where landlords still have the upper hand, and that's why we've been calling on all provinces to put a ban in place on commercial rent eviction before May 1st. And that really being the signal that brings more landlords to the table. And ultimately, in the coming weeks, we may need to have all provinces essentially mandate that if a landlord and a tenant find themselves in a situation where there has been a recognition that sales have dropped over 70%, then there is a requirement that landlords and tenants sign that agreement. And there would be real benefit in providing additional support to small business tenants that may find themselves anywhere from a 30% drop in sales to a 69.9% drop in sales. Today, they're not eligible for any rent relief, and they're required to pay their rent in full. And if they don't, they could be evicted. So we can understand that for so many across the spectrum of this and across the country, it's still a very challenging and I would say a dire circumstance.
Well, yeah, because I find I talk to a lot of industry people who may not be owners, but just in general, just in hospitality, and it's sort of like a bit of a boo hiss to landlords. And I'm like, well, landlords are small business as well. Like they have their own costs and whatnot involved with it all too. So you can't dismiss one area to benefit another.
Yeah, absolutely. And really the perspective that I think you and many listeners would have probably arrived at on your own evaluation of this whole situation is that the major Canadian banks could, in sharing the burden, offer to do more. And part of that could be for them to defer interest payments on mortgages, which would apply and could apply both to Canadian homeowners or those with residences, as well as a deferral on mortgage payments and the interest accruing for commercial mortgages as well, which would potentially allow more landlords and tenants to have a temporary relief. Now, that's not a leadership position that the major Canadian banks have taken to date, but I certainly do think that many folks that I've spoken to have seen that as a leadership opportunity that bank CEOs could and should come together on. But we've not focused our energy there because ultimately it has been the federal government that has been taking the lead and continues to understand what are the gaps still remaining that need to be acted on, and ultimately for provinces to follow suit in a coordinated approach across the country.
Do you think the government is sort of slowly but surely really understanding the impact that small business has on the whole economy? Like I know from hospitality, I've talked to a lot of people in the associations like the BCRFA and stuff like that about just not completely understanding how many people are employed in the hospitality industry, just because it's very transient. There's a lot of people that do 2 shifts a week or 3 shifts every fortnight, a lot of university students, stuff like that. Do you think as this has progressed, the government has really started getting out of the big corporation sort of mind frame and really lent into okay, well, even though we don't have all the facts and figures that we probably should have, small business is way bigger than what we thought it was?
Yeah, I think there has been an increasing recognition that small business is too big to fail in this. And certainly we're finding ourselves in a situation where, while there are some bailout packages that have been announced for example, the energy sector, we are seeing a prioritization as more and more elected officials and those folks in Ottawa and part of the bureaucracies for provincial governments really are presented with what have been some very good attempts. Certainly Save Small Business has been a part of that new wave of organizations. I've been fortunate to get to know folks that are leading Save Hospitality Group as well, and I really appreciate the work that they've done on behalf of so many hospitality business owners and industry employees. So there's been some great work there, and other groups coming to the foreground more recently. The one that I've learned about is Save Your Local recently. Mm-hmm. So there's a variety of real committed leaders that have really just stepped forward to present what we are all seeing in our communities, and for us it's been a national effort, raising awareness of these issues across the country, and connecting with various groups that exist from across Vancouver and British Columbia, certainly many folks in Ontario and all the way on the East Coast, and various business improvement associations across the country have been great partners, and certainly on their main streets are rallying business owners, both tenants and landlords, and working together as best we can to figure out the on-the-ground solutions that are needed. So I think that for many decision makers, there has been a raising of awareness over time, and I think we've really needed to create a sense of urgency for faster action, because while folks in Ottawa, particularly the Prime Minister and others, have said they're moving faster than they ever have, the reality is that for many business people that are in this situation, it's not fast enough, and so that's where the pressure that we've collectively been building in advocating for what is the additional support that is really needed to prevent the vast majority of hospitality businesses and the vast majority of small businesses across Canada from potentially not reopening after this, potentially people just deciding to hand their keys back to their landlord and just go bankrupt. And the personal casualties of all that would be many people having their house as collateral on their business loans, and many other really very, very challenging implications for the small businesses that maybe they're not making that much money, but they're providing a lot of jobs, right? Both for business owners and for people. And so for me, as a lover of good food and drink, living in Toronto as I do, there's some amazing restaurants, and I've gotten to know many other local cafes and coffee shop owners, microbreweries, et cetera. So there's a real risk that many aren't going to qualify for these programs that have been announced, and there's still misconceptions that need to be addressed, and that's what we're committing to doing with both the federal, provincial, and municipal leaders that also have a important role to play.
So hypothetically speaking, the next month, everything goes your way for the lobbying. What do you want to see in the next month come out of the federal government, including mechanisms? So it might be announced, but as you said, it gets announced, which is great. Everybody gets hyped up about the announcement. Then the mechanism takes 3 to 4 weeks to roll out. What do you want to see hypothetically? What's your main goal with Save Small Business?
Yeah, so if we were to see, the list of initial demands that we were offering to the federal government on the SaveSmallBusiness.ca website, there was a piece around increasing the wage subsidy, which was a sort of a upgraded response initially the wage subsidy was only 10%. So now that it's up at 75%, that helps. But that doesn't help many small businesses that have been forced to close and those that have already laid off their staff. So really, the additional supports that are still needed, one that's more on the provincial and municipal level, that would relate to property taxes, because that is a fixed cost that most small business owners, as part of their lease agreement, may pay for some or all of that. So that's something which we're calling sort of in the coming weeks and months needs to be addressed, and to look at how to defer or to eliminate that cost entirely for the time being. As part of what we've said is to look at a waiving of 25% of that cost around property taxes would be a good step. So really, beyond that, the biggest piece is that the rent relief program offers support to the vast majority of small and local businesses, and so that needs to look at certainly more landlords and tenants signing the CERCA agreement, where there is already recognition that 70% or more of sales have declined over the last month or two. So that's kind of really the implementation of the current program, which would be enhanced by the moratorium on commercial evictions that the provinces need to do. And then what the federal government and the provinces need to continue to dig in further on as it relates to CERCA is to create a second tier of support. Maybe it's less financial aid, but it still is some support for those businesses that have experienced a 30 to 70% decline in revenue over the last few months. Because those businesses right now are required to pay their full rent for May 1 and future months, and they've potentially experienced enough of a decline in sales that they don't have the revenue to pay rent, and so even a lesser level of support, let's say a 50% reduction in rent, compared to say a 75% reduction for the higher tier of CERCA. That's really a mid-level support that is needed and really should be led on by the federal government and the provinces. So those would represent the big things, and certainly to monitor the uptake of the CERCA program over the next couple weeks, really ensuring that more landlords and tenants are working together on this, and we're gonna stay on it through this entire process to ensure that more small businesses, both landlords and tenants, are getting the support that's needed, that will help them to reopen and to rebuild their businesses in the coming months.
How do you see, as a professional who deals in business relations, how do you see everything sort of panning out after normality goes back? I know normality is a hard word to even fathom right now with the current situation, but in reality, even with the benefits and what you're sort of lobbying for, how do you see business and small business, especially in Canada, playing out at the end of the day after all this is over?
Well, I think that it's going to be a long road, and we are beginning to shift into what is the recovery and the rebuild phase. But the reality is that whether in tourism or hospitality, we're really dealing with a situation that's not going to go back to normal anytime soon. And certainly when we think about small crowded restaurants and wine bars and breweries, I'd love to be experiencing that, beautiful communal table and other close quarters experiences with good food and drink. I mean, the reality is that we're not likely to see that for months in a full reopening. And so the challenge is going to remain for many small businesses and those in the hospitality sector particularly, alongside tourism, is to really be able to take steps to reopen and generate some revenue, but also be able to ride this for many months still, and to be able to have the support from their landlords and from the government to really help truly get through this to the point where hopefully in many months or in a year or two, things are reapproaching what we would call a more normal scenario. But I think that we have to recognize that there's probably going to be an abnormal before there's anything that semblances what things looked like previously. And so in that, we're going to need to continue to learn and share, and there's a variety of resources that are being developed by industry groups. I know, for example, the Retail Council of Canada has got some great resources that are publicly available. And certainly I think, Restaurant Canada and others will continue to share their resources. We're kind of connecting across boundaries. So, happy to continue to share that with our network for those that are signing up on SaveSmallBusiness.ca. But really, I think it is recognizing that this is such a hit and is such a challenging situation that I think we're going to need to think about new and creative ways to recover and rebuild and move forward. And it will have a lasting impact on certainly the main streets of communities across Canada and the business models and the approach. And so as an example, one thing that has loosened and made a difference, I think, for many hospitality businesses is, where there's some food pickup or delivery options for some farm-to-table restaurants. They've shifted into some grocery or meal kit options as well. And then there's, the ability to, for a variety of businesses to sell alcohol, which, in a different way, through pickup or delivery, that has offered a significant boost in revenue where that didn't even exist before. So I'd like to think that there will be some of those things that can stay, and certainly recognizing, as I think a growing number of Canadians and certainly more politicians, appreciating how important small business and those in the hospitality industry are to our communities and their much greater ripple effects through local economies. So I think these are all important things that we all need to continue to stand up for and fight for what's really needed in the coming months and years. And I would like to think that many of the groups and the relationships that have been built through this process can support and enhance the recovery that we need here across Canada.
Well, Michael, I really want to thank you for your time. That was it was a nice look outside my usual listeners' hospitality-centric sort of scope, and really sort of interconnects how even the weirdest little small business that may not necessarily plug straightly into hospitality, it influences the whole ecosystem, influences everything else. So I really want to thank you for your time and all your hard work, and everybody that's involved in SaveSmallBusiness.ca. It's an amazing platform, and I'm going to make sure that everybody signs up for it so they can keep abreast of all the information you guys are putting out.
Well, thank you, Shawn. I really appreciate you having me on, and appreciate your thoughtful questions and all the listeners thinking about, what more can we as Canadians do to help small businesses across our amazing country.
Thank you very much again, Michael. Have a good day.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks for listening, Post Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.